Ladies and gentlemen, in this RedGamingTech.com video, we're going to be giving details, a clear guide, if you will, to the game ownership, DRM and so forth on Xbox One and how it will affect you. With this, it will basically give you a guide of how movies work, how online works, and so on. Now, I know I've already been through some of this stuff previously in videos, but they've been mostly opinion-orientated. In this, I wanted to create a clear guide because some people were still having issues. Now, in the next day or two, I will be putting up an article as well that will basically go over the stuff as a fact, frequently asked question. So, first thing first. I guess we should go through the traditional stuff such as how do you buy the games, how do you play the games, and install the games, and so forth. So basically you can buy games one of two ways, either via a traditional retail shop, so in the UK for example that would be Game or maybe even a supermarket, or you could buy them online via Xbox Live. Now, it's currently thought that pretty much every game will be available in both ways. So in other words, if you were to see, say, Forza 5, it would be available in both disc and digital. What's not clear at the moment is if there is going to be a major price difference between the two. Obviously, Sony have quite a price premium, as it turns out, often with PSN games, which is a bit of a pain in the butt, if I'm honest with you. But there you have it. Now this is the important thing. Once you've actually bought the game, it doesn't matter whether it's digital or whether it's a disc. You'll need to then install the entire game onto your hard drive. Once it's installed, you won't need the disc anymore, effectively anyway. In other words, the disc is there just to put the majority of the data onto the drive. Now this is the key part, these two things right here. You need to then log on to the Xbox Live to play the game. Now this is key. In other words, if your internet connection is currently down at the time, for whatever reason, or Microsoft servers happen to be down, you're boned. You cannot activate the game. It's a one-off activation, however. But you do afterwards need to log in at least once every 24 hours to continue to play your games. Now, from this, there are a couple of questions. The first is, do you need to keep the disc? I've been asked this a couple of times on the channel with various questions. You know, what happens if my game disc breaks? What about if I lose it because I don't need to use it that often? You know how things get lost if you don't need them that often. They could sometimes be lost into the great oblivion, if you will. Well, in this case, you'll basically need the disc if you perhaps want to trade it in. We do know that trade-ins do work, providing that the developer/publisher have enabled them for that particular game. So in other words, a Microsoft, by the way, as far as we understand, any Microsoft game will be tradable. But it does need to be done by a pre-approved retailer. Most likely, in that case, you'll need the disc, although this hasn't been confirmed yet. You'll also need the disc if you want to take the game around your friends. Now, presumably, and this hasn't been 100%, confirmed. And we'll go into this in a bit more detail in a moment in terms of how your account works. But presumably, if you want to play a game, let's just use Forza because we know it's confirmed and so on. Let's say you want to take that game around your friend's house and you want to play it. I'm presuming there will be one of two ways to do it. One, you would be able to take the game via the disc, put it into your friend's Xbox, and then there you have it. It's installed, and then you can play it. Number two is that you would actually be able to download that. But bear in mind, this is next generation stuff. That most likely means that most games are going to be at least 8 gigabytes. This is a pure theory on my part, but I certainly wouldn't be surprised if some of the games go up to 16, maybe 20 gigs later on, because you've got to bear in mind that it's going to be basically using HD texture/PC format, and a lot of those games, for example Skyrim on PC, is well over the 16 gig mark, especially if you start putting in HD textures and some of the add-on packs, such as, say, Dawnguard. Now, as I was saying, you do need to be online to play on your Xbox. Now, as far as we understand it, Not all services are required to with a 24-hour day activation, and these are specifically watching live TV, Blu-rays, and DVD movies. Only the games themselves require the once-a-day activation. So in other words, if you just want to watch a movie, it doesn't matter if your internet is working or not working, which I suppose makes sense. Now, moving back on to taking a game around a friend's. Now, there is the once-a-day activation. As you guys know, that's every 24 hours. Now, this is the important thing. If you are not playing on your own console, in other words, let's say you were to take your game around your friend Steve's house and you were to put your game in, you will need to keep an internet connection. It will basically constantly ask every hour. And that's basically the bottom line. So there you have it. Now, in terms of the discs and how they work, this is really important, and this has been really confusing a few people. This is in terms of ownership, okay? So in other words, how games work in terms of for you and how they work if you want to lend them out. So first thing first, the disc that you actually have in your possession is not proof of ownership. Okay, so you're basically just licensing the games. This is very similar, I've used this a couple of times, this is very similar to how MMOs work. I don't know if you've ever read the T's and C's, terms and conditions, with say World of Warcraft, but basically you're licensing access to work on it because it's cloud-based and on a server, and they could basically take that privilege away. And there have been a few concerns that this could be the case here. But in this case, you basically license the games only. Now, the discs are purely for installation purposes. As I said, you can take them around friends and so forth as well. Now, in terms of authorizing people to play the games, you can actually authorize up to 10 people to play these games on a different Xbox. But they'll download the game onto their own Xbox hard drive. But they cannot play that game simultaneously to yourself. So in other words, they will work very much like, say, World of Warcraft or Guild Wars 2 or StarCraft or pretty much any of those games, where if you log in around, say, one person's house, and then you'll have to, well, log out for someone else to try and play your account, okay? I'm not quite sure how stringent they're going to be on that. I don't know if it's going to be a case of, hey, you know what, Tom's playing, you'll have to log out, or whether your master account will always have access or so forth. Now, what about lending a game to a friend? So in other words, your friend wants to borrow a game and, well, what happens? Well, traditionally, as you guys are aware, you can take your copy of Halo, just for example, or whatever system you happen to be playing on, but you can take, for example, your copy of Halo, you can give it to Tom, then he can give it back to you, then you can lend it to your friend Bill, and he can give it back to you, then you can lend it back to Tom, and so forth. That's fine and permissible, because it's a disc, and all the data is kept on a disc, and there are no licenses. That is not the case here. This is very important. You can give, or basically you're giving the game to someone for a friend for free, but you can only do it once, and this is the important part as well. Your friend has to be on your friend list for 30 days. They haven't really said why that is, but if I had to presume the reason, it would be so that you can't just, say, make a forum account and start trading on forums or Facebook or whatever, just randomly with someone for a fee. For example, oh look, I see you have Forza 5, I'll give you $5 to $10 to borrow it from you for X amount of time. So as I said, you can only do that once, so just be really careful with who you do lend it to and make sure they get full use out of the game before you get it back. So yeah. In regards to rentals or pretty much loaning games, Microsoft have said that this is not going to be at launch, it will be later on that they're going to enable this feature. They have not given a specific time limit, so obviously not at launch means a week later, or it could mean 6 months later. It's pretty much whenever they want to, or whenever they can support the feature, shall I say. Now, on the subject of used games, I just want to make this abundantly clear. Microsoft themselves are not setting the rules of whether you can trade in the game. They have said that basically it is down to publishers. So in other words, companies like EA, Activision, Capcom, whomever, basically get to decide, okay, is my game tradable? Now, I'm assuming they can set this on a per game basis, so I would not be surprised, and this is purely conjecture on my part, with obviously no basis in fact, just conjecture, if multiplayer games are more easily traded than single-player games. Why? Because obviously speaking, once you've completed a single-player game, you may or may not be inclined to complete the game again, depending on, well, what type of person you are. So Microsoft basically will have to make sure that it is a pre-approved retailer. Now, one of the problems that people have with this is that, well, it basically limits smaller kind of independent stores, but we're not really sure exactly what happens. Now, I think there are a couple of things that we still need to clarify. First is that Microsoft say they do not charge any fee to the retailers, the publishers, or consumers. They basically just provide the service. They're not charging for it. So you can say basically your Xbox Live fee or whatever is their cost of maintenance for the servers. They're not going to add any additional fees. They're not getting a cut of the slices of the pie. If you're trading something, that's between you, the retailer, and say for example EA, and that's really as far as it goes in terms of Microsoft's involvement. As for whether any of this will change, it's possible. Microsoft are saying that they may change their policies, terms, products, and services. Yes, that is a direct quote. As the Xbox One basically goes forward in terms of its shelf life, so it's possible they could either cease some of these services or make them less stringent, or maybe even more stringent. I'm really guessing most of this stuff depends on how well it's received, because ultimately you guys, and myself of course, but primarily you guys, have the power. In other words, you as the buyers, you as the purchasers, you as the gamers have the power to say with your wallets basically, no, we are not happy with this, or yes, we are happy with this, and I'm assuming Microsoft will abide by that. There are a few questions, however, that Microsoft have not made abundantly clear. So we'll go into a few of them because there are dozens of questions, honestly speaking, that still haven't been covered. Most possibly some of this stuff will be done on EA, so I may... E3, so I'll probably try and make a follow-up video if some of this stuff is covered, but I'm assuming it won't be any major updates because most of the big stuff has now been kind of, well, let's go with finished. Anyway, one of the big ones that people are really concerned with, of course, buying online is their credit card details. One of the questions are basically, will it store their credit card details / your personal information permanently and access with a password? Now, one of the reasons people have this issue is because, well, not everything is secure, for A, and for B, people don't usually like their card details being left on a particular service because, one, they're paranoid that their console may get stolen or whatever. You know, say for example someone burglarizes your house, or you maybe lend your console to someone, or maybe you have friends round or whatever and you leave the system unattended, or maybe you're just one of those people that just don't really like the idea of your information being on the cloud, so to speak, and that's fine and perfectly understandable. After all, PSN did get hacked, and Microsoft have had their own share of security issues as well. So that's not been clarified, to be honest with you, either. One of the biggest ones is what's happening in terms of servers if they were to start terminating them. Now, this is a really big one, and this is actually starting to upset people. Now, how all this basically works is, let's say in 6 years' time or 5 years' time, when, say, the Xbox One is no longer popular. let's say you have a decent game collection. This is especially true for retro gamers, by the way. What happens? Now, Microsoft is saying, because a lot of their stuff works on virtual machine, that in theory, you should be able to access it, 20 years into the future. But the problem with theories is they don't necessarily equal to real life. So I'd really like them to clarify. Now, to give you an idea, Valve have said that if their company ever went bankrupt, Gabe New, I believe, was the one who said this, but it was something along the lines of, it's not exactly a word-for-word quote, but it was something along the lines of, if we ever go bankrupt, we will make it so all games are automatically activated and you will never have to go online. Now, we know that Valve stuff works offline anyway. Obviously, you would not have game updates, but still. In terms of Microsoft, what happens if their servers just happen to go offline? This is particularly true if, say, a big group like Anonymous or whomever decide to hack their servers. What the hell happens? Okay, they decide to take it offline for maintenance or whatever? Because obviously sometimes that happens with Xbox Live. Or let's say in, as I said, 5 or 6 years' time, they decide, well, you know what, we're no longer supporting the Xbox One. Does it still require that 24-hour thing? So I think they really need to clarify this. They've murmured some stuff that in theory it should be okay, but once again, many of my viewers and myself as well, we want to really clarify this. We want to know, does this mean that if I'm a retro gamer and I want to play this console in 15 years' time, just how I can do with, say, my PlayStation 1 or my Genesis or Mega Drive, depending on what part of the world you're from, and obviously that's older than 15 years, but still, I can or cannot do that. So that's one thing as well. On the same token, people want to know just how invasive this whole login thing is going to be. Okay, so is it going to be one of those situations where it's going to say, okay, you need to log in. You've got, it's been 24 hours, so, please log in, pretty please, with pink bows on it? Or is it going to be more along the lines of, it's been 24 hours, we're now stopping all access to your account until you log in? So in other words, the games are just no longer usable. Or is there going to be a middle ground? For example, is it going to be something along the lines of, I am out, or my internet is out, or whatever? And as long as you don't keep taking the piss with this, maybe it's like a function that works for a certain amount of time. They haven't really clarified this, and they have said, well, internet now is a lot more robust. That's true. I am not disputing that whatsoever. But as people have said, many of my viewers, they may live in, say, a poorly serviced area with their internet, or it could be that their internet is just out because they're moving home or whatever. We've been through this scenario dozens of times. Just the other day, for example, my DNS servers for my ISP decided that actually I don't like working currently, so if, you want internet, it's a bit too bad. And I even tried to Google public DNS as well, and no cigar, so I think it was a bit more than just the DNS, if I'm honest with you. But anyway, the ISP was constantly telling me, it's only your DNS. Okay, fine, so why isn't Google working? But I'm talking about the public DNS thing. But anyway, I'm kind of going a bit off topic. So yeah, so I think people would like to know that as well. Finally, and the biggest one, is how the used game prices are going to work. Because we know all of this stuff is going to be digital. There is going to be a digital marketplace as well, most likely for used games. Question is, how will this work? Alright? Will prices depreciate in time? Will they remain the same? Will they mirror that of the high street? Will they be independent? Because let's face it, in actuality, a used copy online, what in the balls is the difference? It's not like the bits of data get old, right? It's on the cloud, so in theory, if you were to buy someone's copy who had bought that game on launch, and 6 years later you bought that used copy, you're still getting exactly the same product. It's just a license to play that game, and this is really important. One of the reasons, of course, that games really depreciate, especially with physical copies, used ones, is because, well, they can get scratched to buggery and so on and so forth. In this respect, it does mean that, well, used games could definitely have a longer shelf life. We'll have to see. Obviously, as sequels come out, for example, let's assume that you were to get Gears of War 6, just for example, and, you know, that means that the ones prior to that, say Gears of War 5, would have come down in price, in theory, right? Because obviously it's older, most people would have played it, so they then drop the price to reflect that, because they want more people to pick it up. So we'll just have to see what happens in that respect as well. Now, I have no doubt whatsoever, this is just my closing thoughts, that people are going to try to abuse the system, particularly as there is this whole up to 10 people could play the games. Now, obviously, as I said, that means that, in theory at least, you could share the games between 10 people. So if you've got 10 friends, well, 9 other friends, shall I say, and you've all got Xboxes, that means you can actually go through the games really quickly. So that could be one way to do it. Of course, the problem with this is multiplayer games, that doesn't really work too well. Because, as it turns out, you obviously need internet connection. So we're not quite sure how that's going to work. I would not be surprised if Microsoft become a bit more draconian on that, because it could well be that one of you could buy the game and then starts to swap it out with friends, so especially true of single player. So we're really going to have to see how they're going to police some of their measures. Obviously, some of the stuff is still up in the air, but that does just about cover all of the information in a really simple to use fact. I will be putting this stuff out in a text guide over the next couple of days as well, which will be updated with any E3 rumblings, because obviously we've got that coming up in just a day or two. Anyway, I think that just about does it for now. Hopefully you've enjoyed it and find things a little bit clearer. I will be seeing you around soon. Take care and bye for now.